It started with a laugh. Not mine, hers. We were at a neighborhood barbecue 2 Saturdays ago, the kind where everyone brings overpriced craft beer and acts like they actually enjoy discussing lawn treatments and HOA meetings. Lauren had been chatting with a group of people near the fire pit, mostly co-workers from her marketing agency, since this whole thing was thrown together by her office manager. I was standing off to the side, nursing a warm beer and watching the kids run around with sparklers, when I heard it. That laugh. Loud, flirty, a little too familiar. The kind of laugh you give someone when you're trying to tell them something without actually saying it. I looked over and saw her with him, some guy I didn't recognize. Tall, thin, hair too perfect for someone who claimed to work in client strategy. He leaned in close as she threw her head back, the firelight catching the glint of her necklace, the one I bought her last Christmas, the one she said she only wore on special occasions. They weren't touching, not yet, but the air between them might as well have been a hand sliding up her thigh. I watched, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it, that it was just a conversation, maybe a joke about something work-related, but something in her body language screamed otherwise. The way she tilted her head, the way her fingers played with the edge of her wine glass, the way she touched her own collarbone while listening to him talk. It was all wrong. Lauren hadn't looked at me like that in months. I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. Not at the barbecue. Not with the kids around. Not with her laughing like a woman who didn't remember the husband standing across the yard. On the drive home, she was unusually quiet, scrolling through the photos someone had taken at the party, smiling to herself like she'd just remembered a private joke. I glanced over at her, trying to read her expression, but she tucked her phone away before I could catch more than a flash of that same smile. "Fun night," she said casually, not even looking up. I nodded, kept my eyes on the road, but my fingers tightened on the wheel without me realizing. When we got home, she went straight to the bathroom. I heard the water running, the sound of drawers opening, a hair dryer, the scent of her expensive body mist wafting through the hallway. She was getting ready for bed, and everything felt completely normal, except it wasn't. It couldn't be. Not after that laugh. Not after the way she looked at him. The next morning, I took the kids out for breakfast. I told her I wanted to give her a break, let her sleep in. She smiled and kissed my cheek, told me I was sweet, and went back to bed. But while we were out, I made a detour. I drove to the store where that guy, whatever his name was, worked. I only knew because she'd mentioned it in passing a few weeks ago when talking about a new campaign. Something about collaborating with a boutique agency on a local rebrand. I walked in, looked around like I was browsing, and waited until I saw him. He was at the back counter, laughing again, joking with another employee. He didn't look like a homewrecker. He looked like a guy who spent too much money on skincare and thought sarcasm made him interesting. I didn't talk to him. I didn't cause a scene. I just watched him for a few seconds, trying to figure out what Lauren saw in him. And then I left, heart pounding, ears buzzing. That night, I came up with a plan. I didn't want to spy. I didn't want to go through her phone. I didn't want to become the kind of man who had to question everything. But I needed to know. Not from messages or calls. Those can be deleted. I needed to see it. Feel it. Prove it. Not just to myself, but to her. And so I waited. I waited for her next excuse, her next late night, her next, "I'm going to stay back and work on some edits at the office." When it came, for days later, I was ready. I didn't follow her. I didn't drive by. I didn't need to. What I did instead was simple. I called in a favor. Remember Mark? My brother-in-law. Bit of a tech geek. Not the snoopy kind, but curious, always looking for ways to test out gadgets and hidden cameras and stuff like that. I'd helped him build his back deck last summer, and when I told him I needed a tiny favor, something small, something discreet, he didn't ask too many questions. I told him I thought someone was stealing packages off our porch, and I wanted to try out one of those micro-motion-activated cameras disguised as a light fixture. We installed it that Sunday. What I didn't tell him was that I also placed one in the garage and another, my own purchase, in the backyard facing our side gate. All motion-based, no constant recording, just enough to give me a timeline. So when Lauren left that Thursday, claiming she had to stay late, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed home, put the kids to bed, and watched an old movie with the sound off while pretending to read. At 9:13 p.m., the alert hit my phone. Motion detected. I opened the clip. 30 seconds of grainy footage. A car pulling up. Not a delivery driver. Not a neighbor. A sleek black hatchback. The driver didn't get out. Lauren did. Hair down, heels on. That necklace. Again. She walked across the driveway and entered through the garage like she'd done 1,000 times. But she wasn't alone. The camera didn't show their faces clearly, but I knew her body, and I knew his posture. She looked up at him just before the door closed. And there it was again. That smile. That same damn smile. And just like that, my stomach dropped, and I knew. I didn't need a text. I didn't need a call. I didn't need to hear her say it. I had all the proof I needed. When she came home just after 11, I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to work on our monthly budget. She walked in like nothing was unusual, like she hadn't just spent 2 hours doing God knows what with a man she didn't even have the decency to mention by name. She didn't look guilty. That was the part that bothered me more than anything. She looked normal, calm, maybe a little tired. She kicked off her heels, walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter like she wasn't being watched by a husband who had already seen enough. "You're still up?" she asked, sipping casually, her eyes barely flicking toward me. "Yeah," I said without looking up. "Just wanted to go over the bank statements before the weekend." She made a sound, something between a hum and a sigh, then turned and walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. I didn't follow right away. I sat there, listening to the sound of the bedroom door closing, and I waited until the house was quiet again. In the morning, she acted like everything was fine. She kissed me on the cheek while I was shaving and asked if we needed anything from the store. I nodded without answering, watching her reflection behind me in the mirror. She straightened her blouse, checked her hair, and smiled at herself like she didn't just betray the person who had been doing her laundry and packing her lunches for 15 years. That was Friday. I waited through the entire day, stewing in silence, trying to decide what kind of man I was going to be about this. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to hit anything. I wanted to ask her one question and look her in the eye when she gave me the answer. And if she lied, I wanted to see how she did it. So Saturday morning, once the kids were off to a sleepover at my sister's place, I sat her down at the table and placed my phone in the middle. "Play something for me?" she asked, laughing, confused. I didn't say anything. I tapped the screen and hit play on the clip. She stared at it for about 5 seconds before her face changed. Not panic. Not fear. Just an immediate drop of the smile, a tightening around the jaw, a slow turn of her head toward me. I paused the video and looked at her. "You want to tell me what the hell this is?" She took a deep breath, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me the way you'd look at someone you didn't owe a real explanation to. "It's nothing," she said. "Just dropped off a friend." That's when I knew she was going to lie all the way through this. "A friend?" I asked, still calm. "What's his name?" She blinked. "Jason." I waited. "Full name?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Why do you need his full name?" I leaned in slightly. "Because you've never mentioned him before. Because he doesn't just drive you home, Lauren. I saw the way you looked at him. I saw how close you were standing. I know something is going on. I'm not stupid. So either you start talking, or I'll keep pressing until you run out of ways to cover it up." She looked away, stared at the wall behind me, her arms crossed, fingers gripping her elbows like she was holding herself together. "He's someone from work," she said quietly. "We've gone out for drinks a couple times. That's it." I laughed once, bitter and loud. "You wear perfume and heels and the necklace I gave you for a couple of drinks." She snapped then. "Why are you even recording me? What kind of man hides cameras around his own house?" Her voice was shaking, but her anger wasn't real. It was the kind of anger people use when they're cornered and need to flip the focus. "I didn't hide anything," I said. "You lied. You walked into our house, after being with him, and looked me in the eye like everything was normal. So don't try to flip this on me. Tell me the truth." She stood up, pushed the chair back hard enough that it scraped across the tile, and walked to the other side of the room. Her hands were shaking now. She opened the fridge, closed it, then turned around. "It wasn't supposed to be anything," she said. "We talked. It felt nice. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I didn't plan on anything happening. But it did. Once." I sat back in my chair, staring at her, letting the silence grow between us. "When?" I asked. She didn't answer. "When, Lauren?" She turned away again. "A few weeks ago," she said. "After that team dinner." I let that sit. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. I could feel my heart pounding, not from sadness, not from shock. I already knew. But hearing it confirmed, hearing it come from her, it took something out of me. I stood up, walked to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water I didn't even want. "So what now?" I asked without turning around. She didn't say anything for a long time. When I finally faced her, she was sitting again, her hands folded on the table like we were in some kind of mediation. "I don't know," she said. "I don't want to leave. I don't want to break our family." I nodded slowly. "You already did." She looked up, her face twisted in some mix of guilt and stubbornness. "Tom, it was one mistake. I didn't do it to hurt you." I leaned on the counter, suddenly feeling exhausted. "You didn't think about me at all." The room felt smaller. The light felt harsher. Everything about her face made me want to scream and cry at the same time. "We'll talk about this later," I said finally, turning away. "I need to think. And you need to figure out what you're going to do next, because staying here like this, it's not an option." She didn't follow me, didn't say anything, just sat there while I walked down the hallway and closed the bedroom door behind me. I didn't cry. Not then. I just lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering how long I'd been sleeping next to a stranger. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the edge of the bed staring into the dark while she stayed in the living room, probably trying to think of a version of the story that would hurt less or sound more believable. I could hear her pacing from time to time, the soft creak of the floorboard near the window, the occasional sigh when she sat down and then stood up again a minute later. At some point around 4 in the morning, I heard the fridge open and close, then the sound of her walking to the bathroom. That was it. No tears, no apology, no begging me to talk. Just silence and the kind of distance between two people that doesn't need words anymore. I waited for the sun to come up before I moved. I got dressed in the same jeans and shirt I wore the day before, grabbed my wallet and keys, and walked into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, still in the same clothes from the day before, her face pale, eyes red, like she'd either been crying or hadn't blinked in hours. She didn't say anything as I poured myself coffee. I didn't offer her any. I stood at the counter, sipping it slowly, watching her in the reflection of the microwave door. Eventually, she spoke. "I didn't sleep," she said, her voice flat. I nodded. "Neither did I." There was another long pause. Then she tried again. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was stupid. I've been feeling lost for a while. And when he started talking to me like I mattered, it felt good." I turned around and looked at her. "I talked to you. Every day. I asked you how you were. I made time for you. I did everything I was supposed to do. You didn't want to feel invisible, but you never told me you felt that way. You just made a decision without me, and now I'm supposed to sit here and what? Understand it." She looked down at the table, twisting her fingers together. "I didn't think you'd ever find out. I thought it was something I could just forget." That answer made something snap in me. "You don't get to do that," I said, slamming the coffee cup down hard enough that it cracked against the counter. "You don't get to cheat on your husband and then call it a moment of weakness you planned out over weeks of flirting and dressing up and meeting behind my back. That's not weakness, that's disrespect." She flinched at that, and I could tell she wanted to argue, but she didn't have the energy or the right words. She leaned forward on the table and said, "What do you want me to do? Tell me what to do, Tom." I walked toward her and stood on the other side of the table, looking at her like I didn't recognize her anymore. "You don't even realize how far gone you are," I said. "You're not sorry it happened. You're sorry you got caught. You haven't even asked me what this did to me, how it feels to find out like this." She stood up then, her voice louder, sharper. "Of course I know how it feels. You think I'm proud of myself? You think this is easy for me?" I didn't move. I kept my voice low. "You made a choice. You chose him over me. Maybe not to leave, but to lie, to hide, to risk everything we built. And now you want to play victim because it's uncomfortable to deal with the consequences?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked like she might break down, but I didn't care. I didn't feel pity. I felt cold, like I had been switched off from the inside. "It didn't mean anything," she said quietly, as if that would change something. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" I asked. "That you were willing to throw everything away for nothing?" She sat down slowly, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. "I want to fix this," she whispered. "I want us to be okay." I laughed without humor. "It's not that simple. You broke something, and now you think we can tape it back together and smile at each other over dinner? We have kids. They don't know yet, but they will. And what do we tell them? That mom needed attention, so she found it somewhere else." Her eyes filled again, and this time, the tears actually fell. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I don't want to lose you." I leaned forward, placed both hands on the table, and stared at her until she looked up. You already lost me. You just don't want to live with that truth yet. She reached across the table and tried to touch my hand. I pulled back. Don't, I said. You don't get to comfort me right now. You don't get to cry like you're the one hurting more. You chose this, and now we both have to live with it. She didn't try again. She just sat there, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater like a child who got caught lying. I grabbed my phone and walked out of the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I needed a few hours without hearing her voice or seeing her face. I didn't know what I was going to do next, not exactly. But I knew I couldn't keep sitting at that table pretending that things would go back to how they were. Because they wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. The next 3 days were mechanical. I woke up, got the kids ready for school, made breakfast, responded to their chatter with nods and smiles that didn't mean anything, then dropped them off like I always did. I went to work, stared at spreadsheets that looked like puzzles I didn't have the energy to solve, responded to emails that didn't matter, then came home and made dinner. She stayed out of my way. She cooked once, but I didn't eat. She sat on the couch and watched television with the sound low. We didn't speak unless the kids were present, and even then, it was all performance. When they were asleep, she stayed in the guest room, and I stayed in our bed with the door locked. I wasn't trying to punish her by being distant. I just had nothing left to give. But in that silence, a plan formed. I kept thinking about the way she had looked at him, about how casually she admitted it, about how fast she tried to minimize it once she knew I'd seen the truth. She didn't deserve to cry her way into forgiveness. She deserved to feel what it was like to be left in the dark, to be questioned, to be made small. I wasn't going to yell, or hit walls, or post my misery online. That would make it about me. I didn't want that. I wanted her to squirm. I wanted her to feel the exact uncertainty I had felt. I wanted her to wake up in the middle of the night, wondering what I knew and what I'd do next. So I started with her car. On Wednesday, I took her spare key from the drawer while she was at work. I drove it to a mechanic I trusted and had the GPS tracker installed under the frame. I paid in cash and gave a fake name on the receipt. The next day, I went into her closet while she was in the shower and removed 2 pairs of heels I knew she liked. I didn't take anything else, just those. I left her a note that said nothing more than, "Nice choice last Thursday." I slipped it into the drawer where she kept her lingerie and waited. That night, when I got home from work, the house was dead quiet. She didn't mention the note, but I saw her hands shaking when she poured herself a glass of water. She knew I was in control now, and that was enough for the moment. Then I moved on to her work. I didn't want to cause chaos in her job just yet, but I needed leverage. I remembered the name she'd slipped up and said that day in the kitchen, Jason. She hadn't said his last name, but I knew enough about her department to make an educated guess. I spent an hour scrolling through the firm's website, looking at staff bios. I found a Jason in creative strategy. His photo was exactly who I saw her with that night at the barbecue. I made a burner email and sent him a message. I know who you are. I know what you did. I suggest you get ahead of this before someone else in HR finds out. I didn't sign it. I didn't follow up. I just sent it and waited. 2 days later, Lauren came home early. I was outside in the garage, organizing old paint cans like they were going to tell me something useful. She came out, stood in the doorway for a few seconds before speaking. "Did you send something to Jason?" I didn't answer right away. I put the lid back on the paint can, wiped my hands on a rag, and turned to her. "Why do you ask?" She crossed her arms. "Because he got an anonymous message, and he thinks it was you. He's freaking out. If this gets to the wrong person, he could lose his job." I stepped closer. "Good. Maybe next time he'll think twice before touching someone else's wife." Her jaw clenched, and for a second, I saw the version of her that used to challenge me when we argued. "You don't get to ruin people's lives just because you're angry." I leaned in. "You did. I'm just matching the energy." She stared at me, breathing heavily, like she wanted to yell but couldn't come up with the right words. Then she turned around and walked back into the house without saying another thing. That night, she didn't eat dinner. She stayed in the guest room again, but this time I heard her pacing well past midnight. I smiled to myself as I lay in bed. She was finally living with the same weight she'd thrown on my shoulders. On Saturday, I called my brother-in-law, Matt. He's a real estate agent, does side work managing rental properties. I asked him if he had a short-term spot I could use, something furnished and low profile. He said he had a unit that just opened up. I told him I'd take it, no questions asked. I didn't tell him why. I spent Sunday packing the essentials, my clothes, my laptop, my tools, and a few boxes of books. I left everything else. I wanted her to walk into our bedroom and see just how empty a space could become. I left a note on the nightstand. It said, "You wanted space. You have it now. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to talk about the kids. Until then, figure out what kind of person you want to be." I stayed away for 9 days. Long enough for her to feel the silence. Long enough for the kids to start asking questions. Long enough for me to hear my own thoughts without the pressure of pretending to be fine. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not even my parents, because the last thing I needed was their sympathy or unsolicited advice. The apartment Matt rented me was basic, 1 bedroom, small kitchen, barely enough space to turn around, but it felt better than being in that house where everything looked normal but wasn't. I didn't decorate, didn't unpack fully, didn't try to make it feel like home. It wasn't home. It was a holding cell while I figured out whether my marriage was worth anything after what she did. She texted twice on the 2nd day and called once on the 4th. I didn't respond. I wanted her to sit with it the same way I had sat with her betrayal. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't going to be a clean reset. It wasn't going to be smoothed over with a few apologies and tears. Then on the 9th day, she texted something different. "We need to talk. The kids are asking questions. I'm not doing this through a phone." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Tomorrow, after work. I'll come by. Don't make dinner. This isn't a visit." She responded with a single word. "Okay." I pulled into the driveway just before 6. Her car was there. The porch light was on even though it wasn't dark yet. I walked in without knocking. She was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, hands folded on her lap, like she'd rehearsed a script she was afraid she'd forget. She stood when I entered, but didn't come closer. "Hi," she said quietly. "Let's just talk," I said. I sat in the armchair. She stayed standing for a few seconds, then sat back down, her movements stiff and cautious. "How are the kids?" I asked. "Confused," she said. "I've been telling them you had to deal with something at work. They don't understand why you left like that." I nodded slowly. "Neither do I fully. I just knew I couldn't breathe in here anymore." She looked down, picked at her thumbnail, then looked up. "I've been thinking about everything. Every word you said. Everything I did. I've gone over it 100 times. There's nothing I can say to make it right. I know that." I didn't interrupt her. I wanted her to keep going. "I've been selfish. Not just about what happened with Jason, but even before that. I let resentment build. I let myself get cold toward you and never said why. I blamed you for how I was feeling instead of being honest. And then I let someone else step in and fill that gap. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a long string of choices I made that led to something unforgivable." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped together. "Do you love him?" Her eyes widened slightly, like she didn't expect that question so directly. "No," she said immediately. "I don't. I never did. It was attention, it was escape, it was stupid." I nodded again, then asked, "Do you love me?" That time, she took longer. "Yes, I do. But I know that might not mean much anymore." I sat with that answer. It wasn't enough, but it was something. "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You broke something in this family. You put yourself ahead of everything. You lied to me while I was tucking our kids into bed. You let me kiss you knowing you'd been with him. That's not just selfish. That's cruel." She winced, but didn't argue. "I've been thinking a lot," I continued, "about whether this marriage is salvageable, whether I even want to try. And the truth is, I don't know yet. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can be in the same room and not see that night, that car, that look on your face." She wiped her eyes, but didn't say anything. I waited a few moments before speaking again. "But I do know that I owe it to the kids to try and figure it out before we throw everything away. That doesn't mean I'm moving back in right now. It doesn't mean I forgive you. It means we're going to sit down with someone neutral, and we're going to talk about this in a way that isn't just emotions flying all over the place. If you're serious about fixing this, that's step 1. If you're not, then say it now, and we'll start making arrangements to separate officially." She sat up straighter, nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do anything. If you want therapy, if you want to scream at me in front of a stranger, I'll sit there and take it. I just want a chance to prove I'm not this version of myself anymore." I didn't respond to that. I stood up. "I'll find someone. I'll let you know the time and place. For now, just focus on the kids. They don't deserve this mess." She nodded again. I turned and walked toward the door. Just before I opened it, she said, "Tom." I looked back. "Thank you for not giving up right away." I shook my head. "I haven't forgiven you." Don't confuse staying calm with being okay. The first session with the therapist was exactly what I expected and nothing I wanted. She sat on one end of the couch. I sat on the other, both of us staring at the same bland painting behind the counselor's head like it might offer us some kind of answer. The questions were simple. When did things start to feel different? What do you want from this process? Can you see a future together? But every answer felt like trying to walk through thick mud. I said I wanted honesty, clarity, and time. She said she wanted forgiveness, understanding, and a second chance. We both said we were willing to try, but only one of us looked like they believed that effort would actually fix anything. For the next 3 weeks, we went back every Tuesday night. We didn't tell the kids at first. I told them I was working late, and she said she had meetings. We smiled for them at breakfast, asked about homework, joked during dinner, but the truth sat in the silence after they went to bed. At therapy, she opened up more than I expected. She admitted to more than I knew about. Not more people, just more moments. More texts, more emotional closeness, more decisions that kept me in the dark. She talked about feeling like she didn't know who she was anymore, about being scared of turning 40, about wondering if she was still interesting, still wanted. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say the cruel things I wanted to say. I just listened and filed it all away. Because the truth was, no matter how many sessions we attended or how many emotions she unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had ended between us that couldn't be restarted. By the 4th session, I told her the truth. "I'm not sure I can come back from this," I said. "I can't pretend this was a bad week or a low moment. This changed how I see you, and I don't know if time will undo that." She nodded. She didn't cry. She just sat there quietly and accepted what I was saying. "I understand," she said. "I was hoping, but I understand." We rode home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't get out right away. "If you decide you want to leave for good," she said, "just promise you'll stay close to the boys. Don't let this ruin what you have with them." I looked at her and nodded. They're the only reason I've even stayed this long. 2 days later, I told the kids we were separating. We sat them down after dinner, the dishes still on the table, and I explained it the way the counselor told us to. That we still loved them, that none of this was their fault, that sometimes adults have problems that they can't fix together. My oldest asked if I was moving out again. I said yes. My youngest asked if we were getting divorced. I looked at her and waited. She looked back at me and said, "Not right away." The kids cried. We comforted them. It was awful. I hated every second of it. But at least it was honest. I packed up again that weekend. This time, I took more. I brought the TV from my office, my favorite chair from the garage, more clothes, the coffee maker. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing else to say. She hugged me before I walked out. I didn't hug her back. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and I nodded once before turning the doorknob. The apartment felt less like a stopgap this time, and more like something permanent. I unpacked fully. I bought groceries. I set up the TV and sat in my own chair with the lights off, watching a show I didn't care about, trying to feel like I was doing the right thing. 2 weeks later, she called and said the kids wanted to come over. I picked them up that Friday, and we ordered pizza, watched a movie, and talked about school. It was the first night in months that didn't feel tense. They didn't ask about their mom. They didn't ask about the house. They just wanted to be with me, and that made everything feel a little less broken. A month after the separation, she filed the initial paperwork. I didn't stop her. I signed what I needed to sign. We split everything evenly. No lawyers. No fights. It was calm, which almost made it worse. Like we were both already living as strangers, and the paperwork was just catching up. The house went to her. I kept the apartment. We agreed on a schedule for the kids. I promised not to interfere with her time. She promised the same. It's been 6 months now. We don't talk unless it's about the kids. I don't ask if she's dating anyone. She doesn't ask about me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad either. I'm just done. The marriage is over. The part of me that needed answers has stopped asking questions. I've learned that people can betray you and still want to fix what they broke, but that doesn't mean you owe them the chance. Sometimes, knowing the truth is enough. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to survive it.